for George!
I don't condone violence, but I understand it.
Justice!
What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
No justice!
No peace!
Civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton with the mother of Eric Garner, another African-American man who died in police custody. And his last words, "I can't breathe," because he too was in a chokehold.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Despite a curfew imposed by the city's mayor, demonstrators in Minneapolis took to the streets all weekend, and they were joined by thousands of other protesters across the United States in almost every major city. In Brooklyn, a police vehicle pushed into the crowd. There were demonstrations in Canada, too, all of them calling for justice for George Floyd. After a white police officer kneeled on Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes, that police officer is now charged with murder. Protesters also gathered outside the White House this weekend, some facing off against police. And through it all, the U.S. president has been tweeting, condemning the violence. Here's what Donald Trump said in Florida during the SpaceX launch.
My administration will always stand against violence, mayhem, and disorder. We will stand with the family of George Floyd, with the peaceful protesters, and with every law-abiding citizen who wants decency, civility, safety, and security.
It was a different tone from a few days ago when he called the protesters thugs and threatened to intervene, tweeting early Friday, "Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you." Now, of course, the governor has called in the National Guard. And joining us from Minneapolis is CBC News senior correspondent Susan Ormiston. Susan, you've been there. It's been a wild couple of nights. So what's behind you? What's it been like there?
Yeah, so this is one of the businesses that was actually burned overnight on Friday. There was a lot of damage and a lot of destruction that first night. This was a check cashing business. It's still smoldering from some additional fires last night. But, you know, last night, Wendy, what we saw here was a very robust police response to the night before. The governor had said, look, we lost control of things on Friday night. Last night, they were out, full riot gear. They had a plan. They were dispersing a protest not far from here in front of a police precinct. They used tear gas and rubber bullets just after the curfew started at around 8:15 last night. And their objective was to move people out and try to control areas that might be vulnerable to looting and damage. And I can say that a lot of people in this city that we've spoken to do appreciate the efforts to keep control, but they also want justice in this death. It is ricocheting throughout the community.
You got caught up in some of the violence yourself. Didn't you get caught in some rubber bullets?
Yeah, I mean, we were with the protesters for hours. It was peaceful. They were sitting down, and when that riot squad came out, a line of more than 100 police advancing up the street, they fired rubber bullets and tear gas. We got sort of jammed on the side there filming, and we were in a parking lot, and it was quiet. They were stopped, we were alone. The protesters had dispersed, and they turned and fired at us. I fired a rubber bullet and hit me in the shoulder, and I got hit by a tear gas canister on the backside. I've got a pretty bad bruise there, but their objective was to move us on. They wanted to clear that area, and that's how they did it. And you know what? It worked. Give you an example, Wendy. On Friday night, they called in the National Guard here, 500 soldiers. Today, there will be 5,000 National Guard in the Twin Cities.
President Trump, Bill Barr have said that this is not really about race. It's not people who are upset about the death of George Floyd, that it's more people who are trying to stir up trouble, that it's not about race. You're there. I mean, what is it? Who are these people?
It's complicated. There's no black and white answer there. We heard a lot of people telling us yesterday, these rioters are not from this state. This is not the style of Minnesotans. That may be true. There probably are. We've heard that from state authorities and from the president's team, that there are people infiltrating whose job and whose objective is to create havoc here. professional, organized chaos people that they've come in. But an example, we can only rely on data. There were 27 arrested in Minneapolis here last night from the riots, and only one of them was from out of state. And what I observed on the first night Friday was a lot of young people, a lot of booze, a lot of partying and chaos, and a lot of looting. And these people were from this city, in and around this city. I can say there's also a counterattack here from citizens. They're walking by me right now with brooms and shovels. They've been here every morning to, come in and say, look, they're going to destroy things. That's happened, but we're here to clean them up. And they want the rest of the country to see that they believe that there's a reason for this happening, and they want to come in and try to clean up their city. We also saw a pretty nasty fight last night between two people, one setting up a barricade, another trying to protect his street and his house, and they were at face to face, and they came to blows because everybody's super tense about the destruction that's still happening here. They don't want this to be the result of their fight for justice.
Well, we'll see where it goes from here. Susan, it's been great to talk to you. I'm glad that you're okay, and we'll see where this heads once you're back in Washington. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wendy.
Susan Ormiston in Minneapolis. Now I want to bring in Elamin Abdelmahmoud. He is BuzzFeed News curation editor and co-host of the CBC podcast Party Lines. He's in Toronto. And in Washington, the CBC's Alex Panetta. Elamin, of course, there were also protests across Canada yesterday. There is an issue here of distress between police and people of color, right?
Well, of course. It's been a particularly rough week, right on the heels of the George Floyd incident in the U.S. Here in Canada, the Regis Porchinski-Paquette story kind of came up, and that story involves the police responding to a call and then a young woman ending up dead. There's still a lot of questions swirling around that, but the anger is still there. There's a lot of frustration at the fact that just the presence of police tends to escalate situations that maybe they're not the best to respond to. So a lot of people are talking about the role of police in escalating situations, whether it's in protests or responding to mental health calls that they might not be the best sort of suited for. So there's really good scholarship and journalism about this. Desmond Cole's written a pretty good book about it called The Skin We're In. Robin Mader's written an amazing book called Policing Black Lives. There's like a really long history of police sort of being involved in anti-Black actions in this country.
And Alex, obviously massive anger and grief in the United States. You wrote a headline yesterday basically saying that Donald Trump is doubling down, quadrupling down on a bet rooted in history that when civil rights protests turn riotous, Americans favor the iron fist. Explain more of that. What are you saying?
Well, there's also a very deep history here. This is by no means the first event of its kind, perhaps the largest, most sweeping one we've seen across multiple cities. But there have been racial riots as a result of frustration over police brutality or connected to police brutality in this country in 1900, 1917, 1919, 41, 43, 65, 67, 68, 92, and there have been several over the last few years. And what's happened over that history, occasionally, you've seen some conservative politicians benefit because, for some reason, many voters will favor law and order over raucous expressions of civil disobedience. And the most famous example of that is Richard Nixon. So that's one reason. It's rooted in history. And two other reasons are just political science research about how people react on issues of race and on issues related to law and order. I was speaking to some researchers at the University of Massachusetts who showed voters pictures from Ferguson. And a specific group of voters, white independent voters, according to their research, became 10 percentage points more likely to favor Donald Trump when they saw that photograph of militarized police, basically police in tactical gear on an armored vehicle. And there's also similar research showing that when Americans think about race, they tend to skew a little more conservative on issues seemingly unrelated to race, which, things like healthcare end up being connected to feelings about race. So those are three of the reasons.
So, Elamin, now President Trump is saying that his comments about looting will lead to shooting, seen by some as sort of glorifying violence or egging on protesters or people to come out and confront protesters. You've looked into this, some of these comments. What's your take?
This has been a presidency of dog whistles from the start, but that is one sort of very clear whistle. The the phrase when the looting starts, the shooting starts, has a long history. It goes back to the civil rights era of particularly anti-black police chiefs saying this. So I have a really hard time imagining that Trump didn't know exactly what he was doing when he was evoking that phrase. He says that he knew the history of the phrase, so I take him at his word when he says that, because then he would have also known the kind of inflammatory reaction that it would lead to. And like Alex said, like, he is trying to signal to his supporters this whole law and order kind of vibe, but at the same time also trying to say, like, look, I'm using language from an era where we used to crack down on black people to sort of like remind you of that again. And I think that's pretty dangerous.
So, Alex, is there a downside too? I mean, there's COVID happening. The economy is not doing very well. What's the downside for Trump?
Absolutely. There's so much stuff happening in this country right now. Massive unemployment. And in this country, if you lose your job, you could lose your health care. So people are focusing on a bunch of things. And by the way, Donald Trump also needs African-American voters. He's trying really hard to increase his score. He's said a lot of things, done some criminal justice reform, trying to win more black votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And this kind of muddies that message.
And I mean, I've only got a few seconds left, but what do you think? I mean, where does this leave, in this case, Americans?
I mean, more people are getting involved in sort of the idea that police might not be the best force in their lives to carry out the role that they're being asked to carry out. I'm seeing more and more people who are engaged in this. I'd hope that they keep sort of, going to research, go into the scholarship, so that they can see that there's a long history of police doing this, and it's maybe time to, bow out of that.
It's been great to talk to both of you. Alex Panetta in Washington, thank you. And Elamin Abdelmahmoud in Toronto, thank you.